I noticed the text message notification flash on Stanley's phone as it lay on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. We've been married for 40 years after all, but something made me pause. Perhaps it was the late hour, almost midnight. Or maybe it was the way he had been smiling at his phone all evening during our anniversary dinner. I hesitated only briefly before picking it up. "My mistress makes me happy," the preview read. My hand trembled as I unlocked his phone. He'd never changed the code from our anniversary date, and opened the full message from Olivia Kent, the young financial director I had personally hired 3 years ago. "My mistress makes me happy. You make me complete. Can't wait to see you tomorrow when the old lady is at her board meeting. I've booked our usual suite." I set the phone down exactly as I had found it and walked to the window of our penthouse apartment overlooking the Manhattan skyline. 40 years of marriage, 2 children, an empire I had built from nothing. Mercer Publishing, now one of the largest independent publishing houses in the country. And all the while my husband had been calling me the old lady behind my back. I didn't cry. At 65, I had weathered too many storms in the publishing industry to waste tears on a man's predictable midlife crisis stretched 2 decades too long. Instead, I did what I had always done when faced with a crisis. I made a plan. The next morning, I dressed with particular care. A tailored Chanel suit in deep burgundy, pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, and the diamond necklace Stanley had given me for our 30th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. I made sure to kiss him goodbye, mentioning the board meeting that would keep me occupied all day. "Don't wait up," I told him with a practiced smile. "The quarterly reports might keep me late." "You work too hard, Hazel," he replied, not looking up from his newspaper. "You should think about stepping back, letting the younger generation take over. We're not getting any younger." His words stung more than they would have 24 hours ago. Now I recognized them for what they were. Not concern, but a careful campaign to push me aside. Instead of heading to our corporate headquarters, I directed my driver to a nondescript office building in Midtown. Leon Russo, an old college friend and one of the most respected forensic accountants in New York, was waiting for me. "It's been a while, Hazel," he said, standing to greet me with a warm embrace. Though I wish it were under better circumstances. I had called him at 2 a.m., giving him just enough details to understand the urgency. "I need to know everything," I told him, sitting down across from his cluttered desk. "Every account, every transaction, every dollar that's moved through the company and our personal finances for the past 5 years." Leon raised an eyebrow, but didn't question me. We had known each other too long for that. "This will take time," he warned. "I have time," I replied. "What I don't have is patience for being made a fool of any longer." By the end of the day, my suspicions had hardened into certainty. Over the past 3 years, Stanley had been systematically diverting funds, not just from our joint accounts, but from my inheritance, my company, and even our children's trust funds, into offshore accounts and investments I had never authorized. As the company's chief legal counsel, he had access to everything, and he had abused that trust completely. The total missing amount made me dizzy. Nearly $42 million. My inheritance from my parents' estate, earned through their lifelong work building a small printing business, had virtually disappeared. "He's been careful," Leon explained, showing me transaction records and shell companies, "but not careful enough. He's been transferring assets to holdings connected to an OK Enterprises. You're Olivia Kent, I presume?" I nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "There's more," Leon continued, hesitation evident in his voice. "He's been quietly buying up shares in Mercer Publishing through these shell companies. Combined with the shares he already controls and those he's likely persuaded others to align with him, he's positioning for a takeover," I finished for him, the realization like ice in my veins. "He wants my company." I had built Mercer Publishing from a small literary agency operating out of a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx to a powerhouse that launched careers and published Pulitzer winners. I had fought through the male-dominated industry of the 1980s, balanced motherhood with 12-hour workdays, and navigated the digital revolution that had toppled giants around me. And Stanley, who had joined the company only after it was successful, who had reaped all the benefits of my labor, wanted to take it all away and presumably install his mistress in my place, the ultimate replacement. "What do you want to do?" Leon asked quietly. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the city lights blink on as dusk fell. "I want everything back," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "And then I want him to lose everything else." That night, I returned home late as promised. Stanley was in his study, presumably on a call with his mistress since he quickly ended it when I entered. "How was the meeting?" he asked, closing his laptop. "Illuminating," I answered truthfully, pouring myself a glass of the expensive scotch he thought I didn't know how to appreciate. The numbers revealed quite a story. A flicker of unease crossed his face, but was quickly replaced with his practiced lawyer's smile. "Anything I should know about?" "Nothing you don't already know," I replied, holding his gaze until he looked away. I slept in the guest bedroom that night, claiming a migraine. I needed space to think, to plan my next moves carefully. Stanley didn't question it, another sign of how far we'd drifted apart, or perhaps evidence of his relief at not having to pretend. The next morning, I called Dorothea Vance, my oldest friend, and the company's VP of Operations. If there was anyone I trusted implicitly at Mercer Publishing besides myself, it was Dorothea. We had started as secretaries at the same agency in the 70s, dreaming of more while typing other people's words. When I branched out on my own, she was the first person I called. We met at our favorite cafe, far from the office and any prying eyes. "This is worse than I imagined," she said, after I laid out everything Leon had discovered. "I knew Stanley was ambitious, but this is calculated." "Has he approached you?" I asked. "About voting shares or board positions?" Dorothea's hesitation told me everything. 3 months ago, she admitted. "He suggested the company needed fresh leadership, and that you were, his words, not mine, losing your edge. He implied there would be a significant compensation package for board members who supported transition planning." My hands clenched around my coffee cup. "And what did you tell him?" "To go to hell, obviously," Dorothea snorted. "But Hazel, if he's approached me, he's approached others. And some of them might not be as loyal." I nodded. The board had 14 members, several of whom were newer additions, bright young things from prestigious business schools who saw me as a relic of publishing's past, not its future. "We need to move quickly," I said. "The quarterly shareholders meeting is in 3 weeks. If he's planning something, that's when he'll make his move." Dorothea reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What's the plan?" For the first time since discovering Stanley's betrayal, I smiled. A real smile, not the practiced one I'd been wearing like armor. "First, we follow the money, every penny. Then we build our case, and then—" I took a deep breath, "and then we destroy them both." The next week passed in a blur of clandestine meetings and late nights. Leon worked tirelessly, tracking down every transaction and building an irrefutable paper trail. Dorothea discreetly sounded out board members, identifying who could be trusted and who had likely already aligned with Stanley. To my dismay, my own son Marcus appeared to be in Stanley's camp. A series of large deposits to his account coincided with board meetings where he had increasingly challenged my decisions. The revelation felt like a physical blow. Not just my husband, but my child too. Simone, my daughter, was harder to read. As the company's star editor, she had built her own reputation independent of her last name. She had always been ambitious, sometimes ruthlessly so. Would she side with her father if it meant advancing her own career? I maintained my normal routine, attending meetings, reviewing manuscripts, dining with Stanley, all while waging a silent war. I smiled through charity galas where Olivia Kent, still employed as my CFO, made appearances, watching as she and Stanley maintained a professional distance that now seemed so obviously performative. 10 days after discovering the affair, I made my first countermove. Using Leon's evidence, I quietly froze several of the offshore accounts Stanley had established. Not all of them, I wasn't ready to show my hand completely, but enough to disrupt whatever timeline he was operating on. The effect was immediate. That evening, Stanley came home agitated, immediately shutting himself in his study with his phone. I pressed my ear to the door, catching fragments of his conversation. "I don't know what happened. Yes, the Cayman account. No, she couldn't possibly. We need to accelerate the timeline." I smiled grimly and poured myself another scotch. The next day, I invited Olivia Kent into my office. She entered with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won, her Louboutins clicking against the hardwood floors I had specially installed when we renovated the historic building that housed our headquarters. "You wanted to see me, Hazel?" she asked, all professional deference on the surface. "Yes, please sit down." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "I've been reviewing our quarterly projections, and something caught my eye." I slid a folder across to her. Inside was not financial data, but a printout of her text messages with Stanley, including explicit photographs I wished I could unsee, obtained through methods I had decided were justified under the circumstances. Her face drained of color as she flipped through the pages. "This is private," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing is private when it's conducted on company devices," I replied calmly. "Especially not when it involves the systematic embezzlement of company funds." I placed a second folder on the desk. This one contained evidence of her involvement in the financial schemes, not as comprehensive as Stanley's crimes, but damning nonetheless. "You have two options, Olivia," I said, leaning forward. "Resign immediately, sign the NDA my lawyers have prepared, and return every penny you've helped divert. Or face criminal charges and watch your reputation in this industry burn to ash." Her composure cracked entirely. "Stanley said you were checked out, that you didn't pay attention to the details anymore. He said the board was ready to support him, that it was just a matter of time." "Stanley," I said, enjoying the unfamiliar taste of cruelty on my tongue, "has gravely underestimated me. A mistake you've now shared." Tears streaked her perfect makeup. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We fell in love. The money, that was his idea. He said you owed him after all these years of standing in your shadow." I felt a momentary pang of something like pity. She was young, ambitious, and Stanley was persuasive. But then I remembered the text, the old lady, and the pity evaporated. "You have until the end of business today to clear out your office and sign the paperwork. If even a paperclip is missing, the deal is off." After she left, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing the confrontation. One down, I thought. The harder battle still lay ahead. That evening I invited both my children to dinner, separately, as they rarely got along these days. I met Marcus first, at a steakhouse he favored. At 39, he was the spitting image of Stanley in his younger days, with the same charm and easy confidence that had once made me fall in love. "Mom?" he greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "Twice in 1 month? To what do I owe the pleasure?" I waited until after we had ordered before broaching the subject. "I know about the money, Marcus," I said quietly. "The deposits from your father, the private meetings, all of it." His fork clattered against his plate. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else," I replied. $200,000 deposited to your account 3 days after you suddenly opposed my digital expansion strategy at the board meeting. Another $300,000 after you brought that vote of no confidence against Dorothea. His face hardened into a mask I didn't recognize. "Dad said you were losing your grip, that the company needed new leadership for the digital age. My leadership. And you believed him," I said, not a question, but a statement. "Look at you, Mom. You still have your assistant print out your emails. You refused to greenlight that streaming deal that could have transformed the company. The world is changing, and you're clinging to the past." I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably between us. "Did you know that streaming deal would have given away our intellectual property rights for pennies on the dollar? That I've been quietly negotiating a better deal with a different platform? Or that the reason I have emails printed is because I've been building physical evidence files for years, knowing how easily digital records can be altered?" Uncertainty flickered across his face. "Your father didn't confide in you about the $42 million he's stolen from my inheritance? Or his plans to push me out entirely, not just from leadership, but from ownership of the company I built before you were born?" "That's not—" "He wouldn't," Marcus stammered, his confidence cracking. "He already has," I said, sliding a thin folder across the table. "This is a copy of what I've given my lawyers. Read it, then decide whose side you want to be on. Because I promise you, Marcus, only one side of this war will be left standing when it's over." I met Simone an hour later at a quiet wine bar downtown. Unlike her brother, she saw through the pleasantries immediately. "Something's happening," she said, studying my face. The office has been weird all week, and then Olivia clears out her desk with security watching? What's going on, Mom? I had always appreciated Simone's directness. Of my 2 children, she was the one who had inherited my clear-eyed pragmatism. Your father has been having an affair with Olivia, I said, watching her reaction carefully. And together, they've been systematically draining my assets and positioning for a hostile takeover of the company. Simone's eyes widened, but I detected no real surprise, only calculation. And Marcus, she asked, has been accepting money from your father, likely in exchange for his support. She nodded slowly. That explains his sudden interest in board politics. Subtle he is not. She sipped her wine thoughtfully. What do you need from me? Information, I replied. Support at the board level, and discretion. And what do I get in return? She asked, pragmatic as ever. I smiled. This was why Simone was the company's most successful editor. She never entered a negotiation without knowing exactly what she wanted. When this is over, I'll be restructuring the leadership team. There will be opportunities for those who demonstrate loyalty and judgment. Simone considered this, then extended her hand across the table. I'm in. Not just for the opportunity, but because I've watched you build this company my entire life. It's your legacy, not his, to steal. As I shook her hand, I felt the first real surge of hope since this nightmare began. I wasn't alone in this fight. Later that night, as I returned to the penthouse, I found Stanley waiting in the living room, a glass of scotch in hand and thunderclouds on his face. What did you do? He demanded without preamble. I'm afraid you'll need to be more specific, I replied calmly, hanging up my coat. Olivia resigned. The Cayman accounts are frozen, and both our children are suddenly not answering my calls. He stood up, looming over me in a way that might have been intimidating if I hadn't spent 4 decades measuring this man. What game are you playing, Hazel? I met his gaze steadily. The same one you started, Stanley. The difference is, I'm playing to win. His face contorted with anger. You have no idea what you're doing. The board is already on my side. The shareholder vote is a formality at this point. Perhaps, I acknowledged, pouring myself a drink. Or perhaps you've miscalculated. We'll know in 2 weeks, won't we? He grabbed my arm, fingers digging in painfully. I've given you 40 years of my life. You deserve nothing. I cut him off, jerking my arm free. Everything you have, everything you are, came from my work, my inheritance, my sacrifice. And I will burn it all to the ground before I let you take one more thing from me. For a moment I thought he might strike me. Instead, he laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that echoed in the sleek, expensive apartment that had never really felt like home. You've always thought you were smarter than everyone else, Hazel. That's your weakness. Pride. He drained his glass and set it down with deliberate care. When this is over, you'll have nothing. No company, no money, no family. Just your pride. I hope it keeps you warm at night. He walked out, the door closing with a decisive click behind him. I stood alone in the silent apartment, heart hammering, but resolve stronger than ever. For 40 years, I had built my life around this man, compromised my vision, tempered my ambition to accommodate his ego. No more. I picked up my phone and called Dorothea. It's time, I said when she answered. Put the contingency plan in motion. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the window, backlit by the city lights, standing straight and unbroken. In the glass, I could almost see the younger woman I had once been, full of fire and uncompromising determination. She wasn't gone, I realized. She had just been waiting for me to remember who I was before I became Stanley Mercer's wife. The real war was about to begin, and I was ready. The morning after my confrontation with Stanley, I woke before dawn with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The shock and betrayal had crystallized into something harder, sharper, a diamond-edged determination that would cut through decades of complacency and manipulation. I dressed in a Navy power suit that I hadn't worn in months, the armor I needed for the battle ahead. My phone buzzed with a text from Dorothea. War room ready, 7 a.m. Our war room was a secure conference space in a private business club 15 blocks from Mercer Publishing's headquarters. Stanley had no memberships there, no connections, and the management valued discretion above all else. I had started my morning walks at dawn during the pandemic, so my early departure would raise no suspicions if Stanley was even awake to notice. By the time I arrived, Dorothea had already set up, along with Leon and a silver-haired woman I recognized as Catherine Walsh, one of the most feared corporate attorneys in New York. Her presence confirmed the seriousness of our undertaking. "Hazel," Catherine greeted me with a firm handshake. "Dorothea has briefed me on the situation. Before we proceed, I need to hear your endgame directly from you." I set my bag down and looked her in the eye. "I want my company secured beyond Stanley's reach. I want my inheritance recovered, and I want him to face consequences for what he's done, legal and professional." Catherine nodded, satisfaction flickering across her usually impassive face. "Good. Not emotional, specific, and achievable. That's what I needed to hear." She gestured to the large screen on the wall, which displayed a complex diagram of company ownership structures, board compositions, and financial connections. "Your situation is precarious, but not hopeless," she began. "Based on Leon's preliminary findings, Stanley has secured commitments from 6 board members. Not enough to force a CEO change by themselves, but enough to create significant pressure if they can sway 2 more votes. Which means we need to secure the remaining votes and flip at least one of his supporters," Dorothea added. "Precisely," Catherine agreed. "Now, regarding the financial malfeasance, that's our strongest card. The evidence Leon has uncovered is compelling, but we need to be strategic about how and when we deploy it." Leon pulled up a series of transaction records on his laptop. The money trail leads through 12 different entities across 4 countries. He's been careful, but there's a pattern that emerges when you look at the timing of the transfers. Most occurred shortly after major company milestones or personal events. The Pulitzer win for the Morrison biography, the expansion into audiobooks, your mother's passing, and subsequent inheritance. I felt sick as the pattern became clear. Every professional and personal triumph had been systematically plundered by the man who should have been celebrating alongside me. "Your daughter Simone has agreed to help," Dorothea said. "She's already gathering intelligence on which editors and department heads have been approached by Stanley." "And Marcus?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. Dorothea's expression confirmed my fears. "Still aligned with Stanley as of last night. He attended a dinner with 3 board members at the Yale Club." I nodded, pushing down the maternal pain to focus on strategy. "We have 13 days until the shareholders' meeting. What's our plan?" Catherine outlined a 3-pronged approach. First, secure the board through individual meetings and strategic revelations about Stanley's misconduct. Second, prepare legal actions to freeze the remaining diverted assets. And third, develop a contingency plan in case Stanley accelerated his timeline. "He won't wait quietly once he realizes how much you know," Catherine warned. "Men like Stanley believe they're entitled to what they want. When threatened, they don't retreat, they attack." The next 5 hours were spent in meticulous planning. By noon, we had a detailed battle plan and had assigned specific tasks to each member of our small but determined coalition. I would meet individually with undecided board members, while Dorothea would approach key institutional shareholders. Leon would continue building the financial case, and Catherine would prepare both defensive and offensive legal strategies. As we wrapped up, my phone buzzed with a text from Stanley. "Where are you? Emergency board meeting called for 3 p.m. today. Didn't you get the notice?" I showed the message to the others. "It's starting," Catherine said grimly. "He's making his move earlier than we anticipated." "What's the play?" I asked, my heart racing despite my outward calm. "Go to the meeting," Catherine advised. "Listen, don't react, no matter what accusations he makes. Say you need to consult with counsel before responding to any allegations. I'll be waiting in a car outside. And I'll call our friendly board members," Dorothea added. "They should hear our side before the meeting." I left the war room feeling both dread and a strange exhilaration. For years, I had felt invisible in my own life, my achievements acknowledged but somehow diminished by Stanley's presence at my side. Now, fighting for everything I'd built, I felt more present, more alive than I had in decades. The Mercer Publishing headquarters occupied the top 5 floors of a historic building in the Flatiron District. I had personally overseen its restoration 20 years ago, preserving the original moldings and adding modern amenities that blended seamlessly with the building's character. It was my vision made real in brick and steel, just like the company itself. As I rode the elevator to the top floor, I squared my shoulders and composed my features into a mask of confident neutrality. Whatever Stanley had planned, I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me shaken. The boardroom was already full when I arrived. 14 board members seated around the gleaming mahogany table, with Stanley at the far end. The seat at the head of the table, my seat, was conspicuously empty. A power play, positioning himself as the true leader. "Ah, Hazel, thank you for joining us," Stanley said with practiced concern. "We were about to begin without you." I took my rightful place at the head of the table, noticing the subtle shifts in posture among the board members. Some couldn't meet my eyes, while others watched with undisguised curiosity. Simone sat midway down the table, her expression carefully neutral. "I apologize for the late notice," Stanley continued, "but some urgent matters have come to light that require immediate board attention. Before we begin," I said calmly, "I'd like to note that this emergency meeting was called without proper notice according to our bylaws, which require 48 hours for all board members unless a supermajority agrees to waive the requirement." A murmur ran through the room. I caught the eye of James Barrett, our longest-serving board member, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. "Given the circumstances," Stanley pushed on, his smile tightening, "I believe the board will agree that immediate action is necessary. I have uncovered evidence of serious financial irregularities that threaten the stability of Mercer Publishing." And there it was, the attack Catherine had predicted. He was attempting to accuse me of the very crimes he had committed. "Specifically," Stanley continued, pulling documents from his briefcase, "unauthorized transfers from company accounts to personal projects, misallocation of resources, and concerning patterns of decision-making that demonstrate a lack of fitness to continue leading this company." He distributed folders to each board member. I noted with interest that my copy was placed before me last, giving me less time to review its contents before discussion began. "These are serious allegations," remarked Philip Chen, one of our newer board members, and according to Dorothea's intelligence, one of Stanley's recruits. "If these records are accurate, we have a fiduciary duty to act." I opened my folder and scanned the contents quickly. As I suspected, Stanley had carefully constructed a narrative using selectively presented information. Much of it related to my recent investments in emerging authors and digital platforms, initiatives that were beginning to show returns but had required significant upfront capital. "Before we proceed further," I said, closing the folder, "I would like to note for the record that as Chief Legal Counsel, my husband has a clear conflict of interest in presenting these allegations. Additionally, I will need to consult with independent counsel regarding these claims, as is my right under our corporate governance policies." "Delay tactics," muttered Marcus from his seat near Stanley. The betrayal in his voice cut deeper than I cared to admit. "Not at all," I replied evenly. "Proper governance, the same governance that requires full disclosure of conflicts of interest." I turned my gaze directly to Stanley, such as the romantic relationship between our chief legal counsel and our recently departed CFO, Olivia Kent. The room went deadly silent. Several board members straightened in their chairs, suddenly more alert. That's a baseless personal attack," Stanley sputtered, his composure cracking. "Completely irrelevant to the matters at hand." "Is it irrelevant," I continued, my voice steady, "that Olivia Kent resigned yesterday after evidence emerged of her involvement in diverting company funds to personal accounts? Or that those accounts appear to be linked to offshore entities established by you, Stanley?" Now the room erupted in shocked whispers. James Barrett leaned forward. "Hazel, these are serious counter-allegations. Do you have evidence to support them?" "I do," I confirmed. "I've engaged forensic accountants who have traced approximately $42 million moving through a complex network of shell companies over the past 3 years. I'll provide complete documentation to an independent committee of the board for review." Stanley's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is absurd. She's making wild accusations to distract from her own mismanagement. The company is failing under her leadership. The digital transition has been a disaster. We're losing market share." Q3 results show digital revenue up 27% year-over-year, Simone interjected coolly, speaking for the first time. And the Watson manuscript Stanley advised against acquiring just sold film rights for 7 figures. These are hardly indicators of failure. Stanley's eyes narrowed at his daughter's betrayal. Anecdotal successes don't offset the larger pattern of decline. Perhaps, suggested James Barrett, we should adjourn this meeting and reconvene when both sides can present their evidence to an independent committee. Clearly, there are significant disputes of fact that need to be resolved before any action can be taken. Several board members nodded in agreement, including 2 I had suspected of aligning with Stanley. His hastily called meeting was backfiring. He had expected to catch me unprepared, not walking into counter-allegations with evidence ready. I move that we establish a special committee of independent directors to investigate all allegations, said Helen Winters, a retired publisher who had joined our board 3 years ago, and that both Hazel and Stanley recuse themselves from operations related to financial oversight until the investigation is complete. I second the motion, added James Barrett quickly. Stanley looked like he wanted to object, but he was too experienced in boardroom politics to fight a losing battle openly. Fine, he said through gritted teeth, a committee. But I suggest we also engage outside counsel to ensure complete impartiality. Agreed, I said smoothly. I recommend Catherine Walsh. Her reputation for integrity is unimpeachable. The color drained from Stanley's face at the mention of Catherine's name. Her reputation as a merciless corporate warrior preceded her. The meeting concluded with the formation of a 3-person special committee, James Barrett, Helen Winters, and Philip Chen, the latter a small victory for Stanley. They would report back in 1 week, with the full board reconvening before the scheduled shareholders' meeting. As the room emptied, Stanley lingered, waiting until we were alone. That was quite a performance, he said, his voice low and dangerous. But you've only delayed the inevitable. Have I? I gathered my papers unhurriedly. It seems to me that the board wasn't particularly swayed by your hastily assembled allegations. This isn't just about the board anymore, Hazel. He moved closer, invading my personal space in a way that might have intimidated me once. I've spent decades building relationships with our major shareholders. They trust my vision for the future, not your outdated sentimentality about traditional publishing. Sentimentality? I laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Is that what you call building a profitable company that has weathered every industry upheaval while our competitors folded? My sentimentality has made you rich, Stanley. Don't forget that. His smile was cold. Rich enough to finance what comes next. You've won a skirmish, not the war. We'll see, I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. But remember this. I built Mercer Publishing from nothing while you were still chasing ambulances at that third-rate law firm. Everything you think you're entitled to exists because of me. I suggest you remember that before you continue this fight. I walked out without waiting for his response, feeling his glare burning into my back. Catherine was waiting in a town car as promised. How did it go? She asked as I slid into the back seat. Exactly as you predicted. He tried to accuse me of financial mismanagement, but I countered with the affair and evidence of his embezzlement. The board formed a special committee to investigate both claims. Catherine nodded approvingly. Perfect. This gives us time to shore up our position. She handed me a thick folder. These are the prepared statements for your meetings with the remaining board members. Each is tailored to their specific concerns and voting history. I took the folder, feeling a surge of gratitude for this formidable woman's efficiency. Thank you, Catherine, for everything. She waved away my thanks. I've built my career taking down entitled men who think the rules don't apply to them. This is practically a public service. I smiled, but my mind was already racing ahead to the next steps. Stanley mentioned he has strong shareholder support. How vulnerable are we there? Institutional investors control about 40% of the shares, Catherine replied. They typically follow board recommendations unless there's a compelling financial reason not to. Individual investors hold another 30%, with you, Stanley, and your children controlling the remaining 30%. So if Stanley can sway the institutional investors, he could potentially force a change in leadership, yes, but not if we move first. Catherine tapped on her tablet, bringing up a presentation. I've prepared a shareholder communication outlining the stability and growth under your leadership, with emphasis on the recent digital successes. We'll contrast that with the risk and uncertainty of Stanley's unproven leadership. The car pulled up outside my apartment building. Before getting out, I turned to Catherine. Stanley will escalate. Today was just the opening move. I'm counting on it, she replied with a predatory smile. Men like him always overreach when they're angry, and when he does, we'll be ready. I spent the evening alone in the penthouse, Stanley having texted that he was working late. I knew exactly what that meant now and found I no longer cared. Instead, I used the solitude to prepare for my meetings with board members scheduled for the next day. Around midnight, my phone rang. Simone. Dad just left Marcus's apartment, she reported without preamble. They had dinner with Philip Chen and 2 major shareholders from Blackwell Investments. They're planning something for tomorrow. Do you know what? I asked, immediately alert. Not specifically, but Marcus mentioned something about a press release. I think they're going to take this public, try to create a narrative about instability at the company. I closed my eyes briefly, considering the implications. A public battle would drive down our stock price and potentially spook authors and agents, the lifeblood of our business. Thank you for telling me, I said. How are you holding up with all this? There was a pause on the line. It's surreal, Simone finally admitted, her usual confidence wavering. I always knew Dad was ambitious, but this, using Olivia, stealing from you, trying to take over the company, I never thought he'd go this far. Neither did I confessed. Not until it was almost too late. It's not too late, Simone said firmly. You built this company. You know every aspect of it better than anyone, and you have allies who believe in your vision. Her words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. My relationship with Simone had always been complex. 2 strong-willed women, sometimes at odds, sometimes in perfect sync. This crisis was revealing depths to her character I had perhaps underestimated. Get some rest, I told her. Tomorrow will be a long day for all of us. After hanging up, I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Stanley was plotting his next move, confident in his ability to outmaneuver me. He had always underestimated me, assumed that my success was somehow accidental or unearned. That fundamental misreading of who I was would be his downfall. I picked up my phone again and called Dorothea. Stanley's planning to go public with allegations, I told her. We need to accelerate our timeline. I'll call Catherine, she replied, instantly alert despite the late hour. We can have our own press statement ready by morning. And Leon's completed the financial analysis. It's damning, Hazel. Clear evidence of systematic theft. Good. Have him prepare a simplified version for the media. Nothing confidential, just enough to establish the pattern. As I ended the call, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For decades, I had built my life around accommodating Stanley's ego, making myself smaller to leave room for his ambitions alongside my own. Now, fighting for my company, my life's work, I was reclaiming parts of myself I had forgotten existed. I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it in a silent toast to the woman I had once been and was becoming again. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in years, I felt fully awake, fully alive. Stanley had started this war thinking I would surrender rather than fight. He was about to discover just how wrong he had been. I awoke to my phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. The digital clock read 5:17 a.m., too early for anything but bad news. 4 missed calls from Dorothea, 2 from Catherine, and a text that simply read, "Turn on CNBC, now." With a sense of foreboding, I grabbed the remote and switched on the television. The morning financial news was already in full swing, and there on the screen was my husband's face, looking appropriately grave as the ticker beneath him scrolled, "Breaking, Mercer Publishing CEO accused of financial misconduct, stock futures down 7%. My hands clenched around the remote as Stanley's carefully rehearsed statement played. It is with profound regret that I must bring these matters to light. As Chief Legal Counsel for Mercer Publishing, I have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders, authors, and employees. The evidence of financial irregularities under Hazel Mercer's leadership can no longer be ignored. The betrayal burned like acid in my chest. Stanley had gone nuclear, taking our private war public before the board's special committee could even begin its investigation. He was attempting to create a crisis that would force immediate action, a classic corporate coup strategy. My phone rang again. "Catherine." "I see it," I said by way of greeting, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to counter immediately," she replied without preamble. "I have a press release drafted and contacts at the Wall Street Journal and New York Times ready to run our side. But they need a statement from you directly, and we should schedule a press conference for this afternoon." "Send me the draft," I said, already moving toward my closet to select the day's armor. "I'll review it and be at your office in an hour." As I hung up, another call came in. "Marcus." I hesitated before answering, steel hardening in my spine. "Yes?" "Mom." His voice was tense, conflicted. "You need to step down voluntarily. The board is calling an emergency session at 10 a.m. If you resign now, Dad says he can arrange a generous severance and consulting role. If not, what?" I interrupted, fury building with each word. "He'll continue spreading lies about the company I built, the company that pays for your penthouse, your country club memberships, the lifestyle you've never had to work for because I did that work for you?" Silence stretched between us, heavy with decades of unspoken tensions. "It's not personal, Mom," he finally said, his tone maddeningly patronizing. "It's business. The company needs new leadership for the digital era, and Dad has the vision and connections." "Stop!" The word cut like a blade. "You don't know what your father has done, Marcus. The money he's stolen, not just from me, but from you and Simone, from your future children, from every author who trusted us with their work. This isn't about leadership vision. It's about theft, betrayal, and ego." "That's not," he faltered, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "The financial irregularities he found were manufactured by him to cover his own embezzlement," I finished. "Ask yourself why your CFO resigned suddenly 2 days ago. Why offshore accounts connected to your father are suddenly being frozen. Why Olivia Kent might have been paid millions through shell companies." The line went quiet again, but I could hear him breathing, processing. "The board meeting is still happening," he finally said, his voice less certain. "You should prepare." "Oh, I'm prepared," I assured him, "more than your father realizes." After hanging up, I dressed with deliberate care. A crimson suit that had always made me feel powerful, pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, and the gold watch my first author had given me when their book hit the New York Times bestseller list. I needed every talisman of strength today. By 7 a.m., I was in Catherine's office reviewing our counter-strategy. The press release was concise and devastating, outlining Stanley's affair with Olivia Kent and the preliminary findings of our forensic accountant showing systematic fund diversion. We had carefully balanced, providing enough specific evidence to be credible without revealing anything that could harm the company long-term. "The Journal will run our statement at 8:30, just before the market opens," Catherine explained. "We've also arranged for 3 former board members to issue statements supporting your leadership and questioning the timing and motivation behind Stanley's allegations." "What about the current board?" I asked, reviewing the list of scheduled media hits Catherine had organized. "Divided," Dorothea reported, entering the room with coffee and pastries none of us would touch. "James Barrett and Helen Winters are firmly in your corner. Philip Chen is with Stanley. The others are waiting to see which way the wind blows." "And institutional investors?" "Nervous but not panicking yet," Leon replied, not looking up from his laptop where he was monitoring financial chatter. "Blackwell Investments is signaling support for Stanley. No surprise given their dinner last night. But Wellington Fund and Fidelity are reserving judgment until they hear from the board." I nodded, absorbing the battlefield report. "And the offshore accounts?" "We've secured court orders to freeze 4 more, Catherine said with satisfaction. "About 60% of the diverted funds are now locked down. Stanley can't access them, and neither can Olivia. A small victory, but I'd take it." "What's our objective for the board meeting?" "Survival," Catherine stated bluntly. "We need to prevent any vote on leadership change and push for completion of the special committee's investigation. We have enough supportive or neutral votes to block immediate action if we play this right." At 8:30 precisely, our counteroffensive began. My phone buzzed with notifications as our statement hit the financial press. The Wall Street Journal's headline was particularly satisfying. "Mercer Publishing Battle. CEO accuses husband of embezzlement, affair with CFO. The stock, which had been down in pre-market trading, stabilized somewhat as our narrative gained traction. Financial commentators were now framing the situation as a he said, she said power struggle, rather than a clear case of mismanagement on my part. At 9:45, I walked into Mercer Publishing headquarters with Catherine and Dorothea flanking me like generals. The tension in the lobby was palpable. Employees huddled in small groups, conversations stopping abruptly as I passed. I held my head high, making direct eye contact, projecting a confidence I was determined to make real. Whatever happens in that boardroom, I told my team as we rode the elevator, remember that we have truth on our side. Stanley has deception, manipulation, and charm. In the short term, his weapons may seem more effective, but in the long run, truth endures. The boardroom was already full when we arrived. All 14 members present, along with Stanley and his high-powered attorney, Bradley Thompson from Skadden. A man I'd hosted at my dinner table a dozen times, now sitting beside my husband, ready to help destroy me. Stanley's gaze locked with mine as I entered, his expression a mixture of contempt and something else, perhaps surprise that I hadn't crumbled under the public pressure. He had always underestimated my resilience. Today he would learn his final lesson about the woman he had married. Madam Chair, James Barrett began formally. In light of the public allegations made this morning, this emergency meeting has been called to address concerns about leadership stability at Mercer Publishing. I took my seat at the head of the table, Catherine beside me. I understand the concerns and appreciate the board's attention to this matter. Before we proceed, I'd like to address the inappropriate and premature public statements made by our chief legal counsel this morning, in direct violation of board instructions to maintain confidentiality during the special committee's investigation. Stanley leaned forward. The severity of the financial improprieties discovered required immediate transparency with our shareholders. As officers of a publicly traded company, we have legal obligations. Spare us the righteous posturing, Stanley, Catherine interjected coolly. If you were concerned about legal obligations, you might have disclosed your romantic relationship with the CFO before making financial allegations, or perhaps explained the $42 million traced to offshore accounts under your control. Bradley Thompson cleared his throat. These counter-allegations are a transparent attempt to distract from the serious financial misconduct. We have the receipts, I cut in, sliding folders to each board member, quite literally. Bank transfers, property purchases, shell companies, all leading back to Stanley Mercer and Olivia Kent. The documentation has been provided to the SEC and FBI as of 8 o'clock this morning. A stunned silence fell over the room. This was my nuclear option, bringing in federal authorities, and I had deployed it without warning. That's outrageous, Stanley sputtered, his composure cracking. A malicious attempt to... The facts are outlined in the reports before you, I continued steadily. Our independent forensic accountant has verified every transaction. The pattern of embezzlement coincides precisely with major company events and personal financial milestones, including my inheritance following my mother's death. Helen Winters, who had known my mother personally, looked up sharply at this. The inheritance was diverted to? Approximately $18 million, Leon confirmed from his position near the wall where he stood ready to answer technical questions. Transferred through a series of increasingly complex transactions designed to obscure the source and destination. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Financial mismanagement was one thing, a matter of business judgment and competence. Theft of personal inheritance was another matter entirely, a moral failing that struck at character. Philip Chen, Stanley's ally on the board, frowned as he reviewed the documents. These are serious allegations that require thorough investigation. Indeed they do, I agreed, which is why I've been cooperating fully with the special committee formed at our last meeting, unlike Mr. Mercer, who chose to violate confidentiality and take unsubstantiated allegations public, damaging our stock price and company reputation. Stanley's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is absurd. She's manipulating you all, just like she's manipulated this company for years. The digital transition has been a disaster. We're losing market share to competitors who... Actually, Simone spoke up from her seat, sliding a report toward the center of the table. Our digital division has outperformed industry benchmarks by 22% this quarter. The Rogers acquisition that you opposed, Dad, has increased our audiobook market share by 17%. Stanley shot his daughter a look of pure betrayal. Isolated successes don't offset the broader pattern of, I move that we adjourn this emergency session and allow the special committee to complete its investigation as originally planned, James Barrett interrupted, with the additional requirement that neither Hazel nor Stanley make any public statements regarding company matters until the investigation is complete. Second, Helen Winters added immediately, we should vote on leadership change now, Bradley Thompson protested. The market is reacting to uncertainty. A clear decision today would stabilize. The market is reacting to Stanley's irresponsible public statements, Catherine countered. Statements made in violation of this board's explicit instructions. Any vote today would be premature and potentially expose board members to liability if made without full information. The threat of personal liability was the corporate equivalent of a nuclear deterrent. Board members might support Stanley in theory, but few would risk their own reputations and financial security on incomplete information. I call the question on Mr. Barrett's motion, Helen said firmly. The vote was 9-5 in favor of adjournment without leadership change. A clear victory for my side. Stanley's face was a mask of barely controlled fury as the meeting concluded, while Bradley Thompson was already on his phone, presumably reporting the setback to their outside allies. As the room emptied, Marcus approached me, his expression troubled. Those financial records, are they authentic? The question hurt more than I wanted to admit. My own son, questioning whether I would fabricate evidence. Yes, I said simply. Every transaction has been verified by independent forensic accountants. Your father has stolen from this company, from me, and ultimately from you and Simone. Those were your children's inheritance he was diverting to offshore accounts. Marcus looked stricken. I didn't know. He said there were financial irregularities, but I thought he meant poor business decisions, not this. Now you do know, I replied, gathering my papers. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? He had no answer as I walked out with my head high, Catherine and Dorothea beside me. The rest of the day passed in a blur of strategy sessions, media statements, and emergency meetings with key authors and agents to reassure them about the company's stability. By 6 p.m., I was exhausted but grimly satisfied. We had survived the initial onslaught, our stock had recovered most of its losses, and the narrative was shifting in our favor as financial media began questioning Stanley's motives and timing. I returned to the penthouse shortly after 7, not surprised to find it empty. Stanley hadn't returned home since our confrontation 2 nights earlier. I kicked off my heels, poured a generous glass of scotch, and sank onto the sofa, finally allowing myself to feel the emotional toll of the day. My phone buzzed with a text from Simone. You were magnificent today. Dad's staying at the Four Seasons. Marcus is having second thoughts. Stay strong. I smiled faintly at my daughter's support, remembering the fiercely independent little girl who had once declared she would run her own company someday. She had her father's ambition, but thankfully, my moral compass. As I was about to reply, the doorbell rang. Strange, the doorman hadn't called up. I approached cautiously and checked the security camera. Olivia Kent stood in the hallway, looking nothing like the polished, confident CFO I had fired. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, her expensive clothes wrinkled. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Mrs. Mercer, she began, her voice unsteady. I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I need to talk to you. Every instinct told me to slam the door in her face, but curiosity won out. 5 minutes, I said, stepping aside to let her enter but not inviting her further than the foyer. She clutched her designer handbag like a shield. The accounts are gone, she said without preamble. All of them. Everything Stanley promised me. The money, the future position, all of it. He's cut me off completely. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but kept my expression neutral. That's between you and my husband. It has nothing to do with me. But it does, she insisted, a desperate edge to her voice. He's planning something. Something worse than this morning's announcement. He said if the board didn't remove you today, he would burn it all down rather than let you win. A chill ran through me, despite the warmth of the apartment. Stanley had always been competitive, but this sounded unhinged. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, studying her carefully. "Why betray him now?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, smearing her mascara further. "Because he betrayed me first. All those promises, marriage after your divorce, a future together running the company, they were lies. When I called him after the board meeting, he told me I was a liability now, that I should disappear for a while if I knew what was good for me. The callousness didn't surprise me. I had seen glimpses of this side of Stanley over the years, though never directed at me so openly. What surprised me was my lack of satisfaction at Olivia's pain. This broken woman before me was also a victim of Stanley's manipulation, albeit a more willing one than I had been. "What exactly is he planning?" I pressed, focusing on the immediate threat. "I don't know specifics," she admitted. "Just that it involves Blackwell Investments and something about rights to your backlist titles. He said by this time tomorrow, you'd have nothing left to fight for." The backlist, our published books from previous years, was Mercer Publishing's most valuable asset. It generated consistent revenue through royalties, adaptations, and foreign rights. If Stanley had found a way to compromise our ownership— "Thank you for the warning," I said, already reaching for my phone to call Catherine. "You should go now." Olivia hesitated. "There's one more thing. The personal emails from your account. The ones discussing your mother's estate and the inheritance. I helped him access those. I'm sorry. The violation struck me like a physical blow. Those emails had contained my private grief, my planning for my children's future. Intimate details never meant for Stanley's eyes, much less this woman's. Get out," I said quietly, my momentary pity evaporating. "And Olivia? If you have any sense of self-preservation, you'll document everything you know about Stanley's actions. The FBI will be in touch soon, and cooperation might be your only chance to avoid charges." After she left, I immediately called Catherine, relaying Olivia's warning. "I'll have our team check all contracts related to backlist rights immediately," she promised. "And I'll station security at the server rooms and rights management offices tonight, just in case." My next call was to Dorothea. "We need to accelerate the shareholder outreach. If Stanley's working with Blackwell to make a move on our rights catalog, they might try to force a shareholder vote to bypass the board." "On it," Dorothea confirmed. "I can have our investor relations team working all night if necessary." As I ended the call, I felt a strange calm descend. The initial shock of betrayal had faded, replaced by a cold, clear determination. Stanley had declared total war, willing to destroy the company rather than see me retain control. He had underestimated me at every turn, assuming I would crumble under pressure or prioritize our marriage over my life's work. His final miscalculation would be his most devastating. I walked to the window, watching lights flicker across the city as evening deepened into night. For decades, I had built something meaningful, not just a publishing house, but a home for important voices, a place where stories that needed telling found their audience. I had navigated industry upheavals, technological revolutions, and economic downturns, adapting and evolving while staying true to the core mission. Stanley had been beside me for that journey, but never truly with me. He had seen my success as something to exploit rather than protect, my achievements as a resource to plunder rather than a legacy to preserve. Tomorrow would bring the final battle. One way or another, this war would end, not with the whimper of compromise that had characterized too much of my life, but with the decisive victory I had earned through decades of underestimated excellence. I picked up my phone one last time that night, calling Simone. "I need you to do something for me," I said when she answered. "Something that might put you in a difficult position with your father." "Name it," she replied without hesitation. Her immediate loyalty brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I said softly, "for choosing truth over convenience." "I learned that from you," she answered, "not from him." As I hung up, I felt the weight of tomorrow's confrontation looming, but also a fierce, unexpected joy. Whatever happened with the company, with Stanley, with the life I had built so carefully, I had raised at least one child who recognized the value of integrity over expediency. Some victories transcended balance sheets and boardrooms. Some inheritances couldn't be stolen, no matter how clever the theft. With that thought warming me against the challenges ahead, I began to prepare for the final battle with the man who had promised to love and honor me, but had instead taught me the true meaning of resilience through his betrayal. Morning light streamed through the penthouse windows as I reviewed our battle plan one final time. In a few hours, I would face Stanley in the decisive confrontation that would determine the fate of Mercer Publishing and of the legacy I had spent my life building. The warning from Olivia had given us precious hours to prepare, but Stanley still had resources and allies I couldn't fully anticipate. At 65, I had weathered countless business crises, but never one so personal, so existential as this betrayal by my husband of 40 years. My phone rang, Catherine, calling earlier than our scheduled check-in. "We have confirmation," she said without preamble. "Stanley met with Blackwell executives at 5 a.m. They've structured a deal to acquire controlling interest in Mercer's backlist rights catalog through a separate holding company. The paperwork just hit our legal department for routine review." My hand tightened around the phone. "Can they do that without board approval?" "Not legally, no. But they're exploiting a loophole in the rights management agreement Stanley himself drafted 3 years ago. It gives the chief legal counsel authority to review and execute rights transactions in the normal course of business." The calculated nature of the betrayal stole my breath. This hadn't been a recent plan born of opportunism. Stanley had been laying groundwork for years, inserting seemingly innocuous language into legal documents that would later become weapons. "How do we stop it?" "I've already filed for an emergency injunction," Catherine replied. "But we need a more permanent solution. The shareholders' meeting starts at 2 p.m. That's our final battlefield." As I ended the call, a text from Simone appeared. "Package secured, en route to your location." A small flame of hope flickered to life. The package was the final piece of our counter-strategy, something not even Catherine or Dorothea knew about yet, something that might tip the scales if everything else failed. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Leon finalized his forensic analysis, documenting every diverted dollar with meticulous precision. Dorothea coordinated with loyal board members and key institutional investors, solidifying our support. Catherine shuttled between court and our headquarters, fighting Stanley's legal maneuvers on multiple fronts. At noon, I received word that our emergency injunction had been granted, temporarily blocking any rights transfers. A victory, but a precarious one. Stanley would appeal immediately, and judges could be persuaded to reconsider with the right arguments, or the right connections. At 1 p.m., Simone arrived at the penthouse, a secure document case clutched in her hands. "I got everything," she said, setting the case on the coffee table. "It wasn't easy. Security at the storage facility had been doubled, just as you suspected." I opened the case, verifying its contents with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. "Did anyone see you?" "No. I used Mom's access codes and the old service entrance, just like you suggested." She hesitated, studying my face. "Are you sure about this? Once we use these, there's no going back." "Stanley eliminated going back as an option the moment he stole my inheritance," I replied, closing the case. "This company is my life's work. I won't let him destroy it out of spite and greed." At 1:45, we arrived at Mercer Publishing headquarters for the shareholders' meeting. The main conference center had been transformed for the occasion. Rows of chairs, presentation screens, media representatives cordoned in the back. The tension in the room was palpable as shareholders, board members, and executives found their seats, dividing like opposing armies preparing for combat. I spotted Stanley near the front, conferring with Bradley Thompson and executives from Blackwell Investments. He looked confident, even smug, a man who believed victory was at hand. He barely glanced in my direction as I took my position at the podium, flanked by Catherine and Dorothea, with Simone and Leon in the front row. At precisely 2 p.m., James Barrett called the meeting to order as the senior independent director. "Before we proceed with the agenda," he announced, "I must inform shareholders that the board's special committee has completed its preliminary investigation into the allegations exchanged between CEO Hazel Mercer and Chief Legal Counsel Stanley Mercer." A hush fell over the room. The committee had worked through the night to expedite their findings, a fact Stanley had clearly not anticipated based on his suddenly wary expression. The committee's initial findings indicate substantial evidence of unauthorized financial transactions directed by Stanley Mercer, involving company and personal funds belonging to Hazel Mercer. Additionally, a federal court has granted an emergency injunction against any transfer of rights from Mercer Publishing's catalog pending full investigation. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Stanley leaned toward Bradley, whispering furiously. "The floor is now open for the first agenda item, the vote on leadership," James continued. "As previously communicated to shareholders, a proposal has been introduced to remove Hazel Mercer as CEO. This was the moment Stanley had been building toward, the vote he believed would finally give him control of my company. I watched as he straightened his tie, confident despite the committee's announcement. "Before we proceed to the vote," I said, stepping forward, "I request the opportunity to address the shareholders directly." James nodded. "The chair recognizes Hazel Mercer." I surveyed the room slowly, making eye contact with key institutional investors, board members, and the media representatives in the back. For 40 years, I have built Mercer Publishing from a one-woman agency into an industry leader that has published 17 Pulitzer winners, 12 National Book Award recipients, and consistently outperformed market expectations even during industry downturns. Many of you have profited significantly from that success. I paused, letting the words sink in. Recent allegations against my leadership were not made in good faith. They were part of a coordinated attempt by Stanley Mercer to seize control of this company through deception and financial manipulation. The evidence compiled by forensic accountants and now being reviewed by federal authorities tells a clear story. Systematic embezzlement of both corporate and personal assets. I nodded to Leon, who distributed sealed folders to key shareholders. These documents detail the full scope of financial crimes committed against the company and against me personally. They include bank records, property transactions, and evidence of offshore accounts containing diverted funds. The total exceeds $42 million. Stanley rose halfway from his seat, but Bradley pulled him back down, whispering intensely. "However," I continued, "financial crimes are only part of the story. Some of you may be considering voting for leadership change despite these revelations, believing that Stanley Mercer's vision for digital transformation outweighs his moral failings." I motioned to Simone, who brought forward the secure case. "What you may not know is that Stanley Mercer has been actively working to undermine this company's future while presenting himself as its savior." I direct your attention to the screens. The presentation monitors displayed a series of email exchanges between Stanley and executives at Paragon Media, Mercer Publishing's largest competitor. Emails Stanley believed had been deleted permanently, but which had been recovered from encrypted backups I had quietly maintained after noticing discrepancies in our digital security protocols. These communications, spanning the past 18 months, outlined Stanley's agreement to deliver Mercer Publishing's backlist rights and top authors to Paragon Media in exchange for a leadership position and equity stake after completing his takeover. The company he claimed to be saving, he intended to dismantle and sell to our greatest competitor. Gasps and angry murmurs filled the room. Even Bradley Thompson looked stunned, clearly unaware of his client's double-dealing. Stanley's face had gone from confident to ashen. As for his claims regarding my resistance to digital innovation, I direct you to page 7 of your annual report. Our digital division has outperformed industry benchmarks by 22% this quarter. Our audiobook market share has increased 17% following the Rogers acquisition that Stanley opposed. The evidence of successful leadership is in the financial results you already hold in your hands. I straightened to my full height, feeling decades of underestimation and dismissal fall away as I delivered the final blow. Stanley Mercer believed I would surrender rather than fight. He believed that at 65, I would choose quiet retirement over public conflict. He believed that after decades of building this company, I would not have the resources or will to defend it. Like so many who have underestimated women of my generation, he was profoundly mistaken. I looked directly at Stanley for the first time. "I hereby announce not only my intention to remain as CEO, but also to initiate proceedings to remove Stanley Mercer from his position as Chief Legal Counsel for cause, including breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of funds, and corporate espionage." The vote that followed was almost anticlimactic. The proposal to remove me as CEO was defeated by a margin of 76% to 24%. The counter-proposal to remove Stanley passed with similar numbers. as security escorted him from the building, a final humiliation he had never imagined possible. I felt neither joy nor vindication, only a weary relief that the battle was finally over. The aftermath unfolded over subsequent weeks with the methodical precision of justice, long delayed but finally served. Federal charges against Stanley, civil litigation to recover the diverted funds, a restructuring of the company's leadership, with Simone elevated to chief content officer and trusted allies in key positions. Marcus eventually reached out to make amends, his ambition tempered by the harsh lesson of his father's downfall. 3 months after the shareholders' meeting, I stood in my office overlooking the city that had been the backdrop to my life's work. The company was thriving again. Our stock price recovered, our authors reassured. The scandal had faded from headlines, replaced by news of our groundbreaking digital initiatives and prestigious acquisitions. Stanley had accepted a plea deal to avoid a public trial, returning most of the diverted funds and relinquishing all claims to Mercer Publishing. Olivia had cooperated with authorities in exchange for leniency. The divorce proceedings were moving forward with surprising efficiency now that Stanley's leverage had evaporated. As I prepared for a board meeting to discuss our 5-year expansion strategy, I reflected on the lessons of the past few months. For decades, I had allowed myself to be partially invisible, my achievements acknowledged but somehow diminished, my voice heard but not always heeded. I had accommodated Stanley's ego, made room for his ambitions alongside my own, believing that compromise was the price of partnership. In fighting for my company, I had reclaimed parts of myself long surrendered to the comfortable illusion of marital harmony. At 65, when many expected me to step aside gracefully, I had instead stepped fully into my power, refusing to be diminished or displaced. The company would continue to evolve under my leadership, adapting to new technologies and market demands while maintaining the commitment to quality that had defined us from the beginning. And when the time eventually came to step down, on my terms, not anyone else's, I would leave behind not just a successful business, but a legacy of resilience that would inspire long after I was gone. As I gathered my materials for the board meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Dorothea. "Ready to show them what the future looks like?" I smiled, typing my reply. "Always." The future, I had learned, belonged to those with the courage to fight for it, regardless of age, regardless of odds, regardless of how many times they had been underestimated along the way. If you found my story inspiring, please hit that subscribe button to hear more true stories of resilience and triumph. And remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and what you've built. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below.